Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins. Let's delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition.
I'm so excited to share this bonus episode with you about the new book, Communicating Nutrition, the Authoritative Guide. I was one of 57 contributing authors to this book. I co-authored 3 out of the 42 chapters. This book is available now. We had recorded the interview in early March and discussed that it was going to be available in the spring, but then the release was delayed due to COVID. I decided to release this episode as a bonus episode because it's more geared towards dietitians and students than my typical episodes are, which are intended for both health professionals and the public. However, anyone who wants to know more about effective communication and also how to identify credible nutrition resources will benefit from listening. When my career path led me into the world of media and particularly television interviews, I learned essential skills that helped propel my career to the next level. I also realized that those skills are transferable to many other types of communication, including speaking, writing, social media, and much more. As dietitians, we are uniquely positioned to help people digest nutrition information and make their own well-informed food decisions. But we need a little guidance on this journey, and this book is a long-awaited resource to help dietitians create and deliver compelling, science-based messages that engage and empower audiences. I just have to say that this book needs to be a part of every nutrition professional and future professionals' resource library. It is so full of practical, evidence-based content. And because courses in nutrition communication tend to be the exception rather than the rule, that owning this book will give all nutrition and dietetic students a competitive edge, both while a student and in their career. It is a textbook with free educator resources, but again, it's an ideal resource for any and all dietitians and even other health professional communicators. The book is available on the Academy's Eat Right store and also on Amazon. Now, whether you are a communicator or not, you may find my Sound Science Toolkit helpful as well. It's available for free on my site at soundbitesrd.com and contains a variety of resources to help you better understand nutrition research, studies, and articles, become more familiar with different types of studies, methods, and limitations, fact-check the headlines, and get past those sensational headlines and understand as well as communicate evidence-based information. And if you're a dietitian or diet technician or student or even a diabetes educator and you're new to my podcast, be sure to check out my free CEU page where you can earn continuing education units by listening to a variety of my podcast episodes. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this episode and share it with others. Hello and welcome to the Sound Bites podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Joy Dobbins, a registered dietitian nutritionist. And today's episode is all about communicating nutrition. I have a very special guest for you today. Barbara Mayfield is the founder and president of Nutrition Communicator, LLC, where she leads other nutrition professionals to communicate with excellence and confidence. Barb is the editor-in-chief for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics' new textbook, Communicating Nutrition, the Authoritative Guide, leading a team of 57 experts in nutrition communication. And by the way, this book is going to be published by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics this spring 2020. Welcome to the show, Barb.
Great to be here. And I do want to thank Melissa. She is one of those 57 experts that contributed to the book.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure working with you on the book and getting to know you and all of these experts, which we're going to talk about the book and everything that people can find in it and what went into it. And it's your baby that you have raised and you're going to launch soon. But for anybody listening who's not a dietitian, I strongly encourage you to stay tuned because we are not just going to talk about this book and what's in it for students, interns, new dietitians, seasoned dietitians, but also some tips for you to get a better understanding of sound science, evidence-based nutrition, what to look for, what good communication looks like. And we've got some resources for you besides the book. So please stay tuned. Now, Barb, I'll admit, you and I have both been dietitians for quite some time, and you're going to share a little bit about your background and how you were in the process of retiring when this project and opportunity came your way, and you sort of made it happen for yourself as well. So we want to talk about that. But I honestly didn't know who you were before this, and it has just been such a delight to get to know you and work with you. And this project is a huge undertaking. So let's start a little bit with your background, how you became interested in nutrition and what your career was before you embarked on this amazing journey.
All right. So I was interested in nutrition from the time that I was in high school, probably, like many students who go into foods and nutrition. And even before being interested in nutrition, I was interested in educating people about anything that was of interest to me. So the fact that I've kind of married education and communication with nutrition is not at all a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to Purdue as an undergraduate, I started in a major called Foods and Nutrition and Business. I was really interested in maybe developing recipes, maybe doing something like working for the Good Housekeeping Institute and writing magazine articles and that type of thing. But then I was encouraged as a student to double major in dietetics and get my RD credential. And that has been a very wise decision because having that credential means a lot. And it really wasn't that big a difference in the courses that I took. I minored in communications, and I did that as well when I was a graduate student. And having that combination just really has propelled me in the kinds of career choices that I made, because I've always wanted to make sure that part of what I did was communicating about the subject matter. I never have worked in a clinical setting. That hasn't been what I've done.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked in public health. I've worked in private practice. And most recently, I taught at Purdue for the last 16 years of my career. And I taught nutrition communication. I taught public health nutrition, life cycle nutrition, introductory nutrition. I loved teaching.
Mm-hmm.
When I retired, I knew that I wasn't going to stop working entirely, but I wanted to have some freedom to take on a variety of projects. And it was really not too long after I retired that the Academy contacted me about this book. And the reason that they contacted me was partly because I had recently done another textbook, an introductory textbook, and one of the reviewers was Roberta Dife, and she has done a lot of authoring for the Academy,
Mm-hmm.
and she suggested my name. She knew that I had taught nutrition communication. She knew that I could write and that I'd had experience with writing a textbook. So when they contacted me, the funny thing is that during the time I had written that textbook, I had told so many people, I will never write another textbook. It is so much work. And to do it while you're teaching was just about the death of me.
Mm.
But to be retired was just a whole different opportunity. And I knew that. I knew that I would have time to do it. And the topic of nutrition communication was like the number one thing I liked teaching. And so the thing I kept thinking was, this is the book I wish I'd had when I was teaching.
Mm.
So I didn't have to really think about it that hard. All I knew is that I was going to have to eat my words to all the people I had said that to. And that was a lot, but that was fine.
No big deal.
Sometimes eating humble pie is a good thing. It's healthy. So I have really enjoyed that process. It's been a joy to work on, especially not having a lot of other commitments. I really have just pretty much focused on this the last 3 years.
Well, very cool. So as a dietitian communicator, I have a couple of sayings, and, you mentioned that, you loved educating, teaching. And I feel like as dietitians, we are educators, but as educators, by definition, that means we are communicators. And when I started connecting the dots in my career, I realized that being an effective communicator is more than being comfortable in front of an audience or a microphone and sharing good content, which honestly is what I did for the first maybe 10 years of my career. And then I realized, I don't want to just make people smarter and more knowledgeable. I mean, my whole goal has been to help them take action. So that means in order to be a really effective communicator, I like to say, you need to express, engage, and empower. And that's what this book is all about. As I said earlier, this was a huge undertaking. This is not some little pamphlet or, resource. This is going to weigh down your backpack if you buy the hard copy.
650 pages.
Oh, wow. It is so comprehensive. And so I want to talk a little bit about why this book, why now. We've had a few communication type resources from the Academy in the past, but this is a new frontier. This is a whole new paradigm and a whole new resource. And as I mentioned earlier, and you can speak more to this, it's not just a textbook for students. This is a resource that any dietitian from a student through seasoned will really benefit from. So talk to me a little bit about how this fills the gap that was existing. And I mean, the timing just seemed to work out perfectly for you. And a little bit about, well, we're going to talk a lot about what's in the book. I think that's the good next phase for us to focus on here.
Well, the Academy routinely surveys their audiences, both educators and practitioners, about resources that are needed. And communication kept coming to the top of the list. And it had been a couple of decades since they had a resource that was called Communicating as Professionals. It was just a little paperback. In fact, I had purchased, when I first started teaching at Purdue, the last existing copies that the Academy had. It was called the American Dietetic Association at the time. And I had them as copies that I kept in my classroom because that was the last set they had. And so
I remember I had one of those too. Do you remember the year?
It was in the early 90s.
Oh,
it was the last,
I was still in grad school then. I was graduating from undergrad and going to grad. I think I still have it in my files.
But really, if you flip through it, it has some really good fundamental truths about communication, but it, like many books about communication, it's going to date itself right away because it was very much driven by the technology of the day. So it might teach you how to write something on an overhead transparency or create slides, but not PowerPoint.
How to fax a press release.
How to fax a press release. That's right. And so I kind of kept that in the back of my mind, even though we do talk about specific channels in the book. It's more about fundamental principles of communication that are timeless. So even though back when I was in school, the internet didn't exist and social media certainly didn't, and I felt really good in college to have a electric typewriter that had a correcting ribbon.
Hey, I can identify with that. I think we're on the same page.
So you have to realize that technology is ever evolving and that there will be new methods to communicate, but the principles of what makes communication effective is really quite timeless. And so to empower students and practitioners with that knowledge and those practical skills will translate for years to come into new formats that they might exhibit it in that haven't even been invented yet. So those chapters about maybe video or whatever, or podcasting, may evolve into something newer, but still the same fundamental principles won't go away. Things like knowing your audience or being evidence-based, being compelling, those kinds of things.
Right. I was going to ask you, what are those? And the two that I thought of for sure was being evidence-based and being compelling, because I talk about that all the time, but absolutely knowing your audience. What are some of the other evergreen or timeless aspects that I know, and we'll talk about the different sections of the book and the different chapters with examples, because you do have some of the focus on, okay, so we've got presentations, we have community outreach, we have podcasting, we have live TV interviews, we have videos. I mean, you specifically, we address all of those different formats that we are involved with now. But let's talk a little bit more about that foundation with knowing your audience, being evidence-based, and being compelling. What else is in that arena?
So one of the foundational principles that comes through really loud and clear, and we talk about it all the time throughout the book, is this idea of being audience-focused. And we start that in the very first chapter when we talk about some very fundamental communication theory, and we talk about the idea of communication being relational, and that communication is not just delivering a message, but it is having a dialogue with an audience. You have a sender and a receiver, and it's reciprocal. It is not one way, it is two-way. You listen to your audience, you figure out what their needs are, you communicate messages that meet those needs, you receive feedback. It's very two-way. Mm-hmm. And I think that too many people today, and really this has happened forever, when they think about communication, they're thinking about sending a message. Mm. And all too often, it's the same message no matter who the recipient is. Mm-hmm. And they aren't paying close enough attention to who is my audience, what do they need, what language makes sense to them, what examples will resonate with them, what is the context that I need to put this in so that it's relevant to them. Am I listening to my audience? Mm-hmm. Am I communicating to them? And that is fundamental. And I think that it's all too often overlooked. And so we have a lot of things in the book that give you references to other chapters. And probably the chapter that's referenced more than any other is chapter 11, which is how to do a needs assessment.
Needs assessment. Woo!
We keep talking to the reader about know your audience. And if you need to know how to assess your audience, go back to this chapter. And that is just reinforced throughout. And that is essential. And that won't ever go away, no matter what channel you use 50 years from now, 100 years from now. If you're not addressing your audience, figuring out what their pain points are, helping them solve their problems, it doesn't matter how clever or cute or concise your message is, it will not reach.
Yeah, you really need to know who you're talking to. And as we've all heard, if you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. But to your point, as a side note, things got really, my hat is off to you, because things got really sort of confusing when there are a lot of cross-references within the book, even in the 3 chapters that I wrote, which I want to give a shout out to my co-authors. Of course, Barb, you were a co-author on all 3 chapters that I wrote, but also Carolyn O'Neill, Jamie Schwartz, Anna Busenberg, and Lisa Jones. I didn't forget anybody, did I?
I don't think so. That sounds right.
The 3 chapters I'll just share that I contributed to. Chapter 10, effective messages are created with and for an audience. Chapter 27, nutrition communicators have greater reach via mass media. And chapter 32, master media interviews to be a reliable and relatable expert. So I had a lot of fun working on these 3 chapters. But yes, we didn't want to duplicate efforts or have this 600 and some page book be 1,200 pages. So, we really said, okay, for more, if we touched on something about a needs assessment, well, for more information, you can take the deeper dive in chapter 11. So that had to be really challenging to keep it all straight. But again, my hat's off to you with regard to that.
Well, you were even involved in a consolidation of 2 chapters, which then made the numbering, because we originally had 43 chapters instead of 42. And so then there was this constant correction of later chapters, not messing up our numbers. But I think we've got that all. The book is getting really close to being ready to go in print. And one of the things that, as I went through it again and again, was making all of those work. And when you have 57 contributors, and yet, as I was reading through it, it was really hard for me to remember which passages I had written and which ones someone else had written, because it really sounds like the same voice. And that is amazing to me.
Isn't it?
It really sounds cohesive. I'm sure you've read textbooks. Lots of textbooks have a lot of contributors. And You might even read a chapter and you think, didn't they read chapter 10
Yeah,
right before?
right. This is
Because
not.
it's repetitive or it's maybe even contradictory. So we really worked hard at making sure that it really kept building on. I mean, there is a good amount of repetition where it's needed, but by and large, we wanted to make sure it was just a continual building.
Well, some repetition is important because repetition equals retention. But yeah, it was definitely a joint effort. And my concern going in was, okay, I'm co-authoring a chapter. My writing voice is really different from my co-author. How is this going to? And then when the edits came back, I was like, okay, I have to look back and see, did I write this part or did she write that part? I don't even remember.
That's right. And there was a lot of teamwork. As we started those chapters, most of them started with a Zoom call or some type of call that we could coordinate who was going to write what. And one of the things that I just loved about working with such a vast team was I learned so much from other people that I might be working with, or the people that wrote chapters that I didn't even contribute to. I would never have thought to insert some information or an example.
Yeah.
And the book is so much richer.
Yes.
Because of the wealth of information that's shared.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask you why so many authors, but you've just answered that. I mean, we have so many amazing colleagues who are doing such incredible work.
Well, let me add one more thing about why so many authors. So we did an extensive needs assessment. So we had done a lot of surveys, and I did quite a few interviews over the phone and talking with both educators about what the book needed to have, as well as practitioners. And as a result of that, there was a lot of people that knew about the book. And when I knew that I didn't want to write it as a sole author, we basically kind of put out an invitation. Are you interested in contributing? Well, we actually had dozens of people say, yes, I would like to contribute. Way more than 57. And so then it was the kind of narrowing it down. And I wanted to have a real balance of well-known people, lesser well-known people, unknown people, people that were teaching in all kinds of avenues. So we have a lot of educators that contributed as well as practitioners.
Newer in the profession, longer in the profession.
Yeah. We had 7 babies born. It's sort of like birthing a book, but we also had babies born.
Wow.
And it was just so neat to be able to allow a person who wanted to have a contribution to either serve as a reviewer, we also had dozens of people reviewing, or as a contributor in a bigger or smaller way. And I don't regret having a lot. I mean, I was kind of advised, like, do you really want to have to work with this many people? And I said, it is fine. I would rather have more people contribute and have a voice and have input than fewer.
Well, bless your heart.
Not everyone would feel that way. And I won't say that it was seamless or that there weren't any challenges. But, after many years of teaching students and having them do team projects, I was pretty good at resolving differences and handling some of those kinds of things that happen along the way. But it was way more a benefit than any shortcoming of having that challenge. And it's a stronger book because of it.
Absolutely.
And it also has many, many cheerleaders of people saying, hey, you need to use this book. And that will help get the word out.
Yeah. Literally yesterday, I had an internship director contact me because I was recommended to do a webinar or a training for her students. And I said, well, first, I'm not sure if you know about the new nutrition communications book coming out from the Academy. And she didn't know about it. I'm like, okay, well, that's the first thing that needs to be on your radar. And yeah, absolutely. And that's the great thing about our field is that we have such a diverse and rich, what's the word?
Constituency.
Yeah.
That's probably not the best word, but yeah, we have a lot of varied people that do this profession, and we can learn from those varying perspectives.
Absolutely. And 1 or 5 or 10 dietetic professionals can't possibly cover the gamut of expertise and topics that are in this book. And, let me make it clear for anyone listening, this isn't just about being on TV or doing a video or social media. There's everything that you could possibly think of in terms of communication is in this book. And we're going to touch on that. Like I said, it is very comprehensive. But what I talk about a lot on this show and what I love about this book is that, I think dietitians, we're trained, and I think to a certain extent we're naturals at educating and working with patients and clients one-on-one and listening and helping support and form and collaborate on goals that are realistic and achievable. I think then when you try to translate that to a presentation or a TV segment or a blog or a book or a podcast, there are some fundamentals there that you need to keep in mind, like we talked originally, knowing your audience, being evidence-based and being compelling, but it looks differently with those different platforms. And that's what I see this book is doing, is taking that foundation and saying, okay, so you are seeing patients or clients one-on-one. Here's, some awesome guidance for you. Okay, so you want to do more with traditional media, or you want to do more with social media, or whatever communication platform you want to take a deeper dive into. And also, can I just say, it's so exciting that dietitians have all of these platforms. I mean, certainly there's more today than there was when I started as a clinical dietitian in 1993. And that's sort of been my approach as a media and communications trainer, is to just kind of light that fire a little bit and say, you don't have to do live TV interviews like I did. You can find something that not only do you enjoy doing, but just that you feel that you're confident and that you are really talented at. So let's talk about the other sections of the book, because, we kind of talked about the foundation, but tell us a little bit more about what people can find in the different sections and chapters.
All right. To just piggyback at first, before I delve into the different sections on what you were just saying, we have promoted ourselves as a profession as the nutrition experts for a number of years now as kind of a tagline. And what we have, I think, kind of forgotten about is, in order to be really, truly good at being an expert, you need to be good at communicating what your expertise is. And most students don't take anything beyond like a speech course taught by their communication department. And so they don't feel very confident in their ability to communicate beyond the kind of traditional modes that you were talking about, maybe small classes or the one-on-one counseling. And so they hesitate to do it. They hesitate to say yes to a media interview or to write a blog post, when in fact, if we are the nutrition expert, we need to be communicating so that the public gets that solid information. So as we wrote those sections of the book, we kind of thought about that. Who is the person that needs to be communicating but doesn't feel equipped to do it or confident to do it?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Barb, because as you'll recall, in one of the chapters that I co-authored, that was exactly my story. People have heard it on the show before, but I'll just recap it. On the first day of my second job in a hospital setting, I was asked to do a TV segment, and I'm in Chicago, and the TV station was going to come to the hospital and do an interview with me on all things, good Lord, about men's health. And I'm like, okay, I got to figure out, I got to bone up on this knowledge. And, I actually contacted the American Dietetic Association at the time, and they sent me a fax with information. Okay, this is 1995. And literally what went through my head, and this is a story that's shared in the book because there's all kinds of personal experience and stories called out in the book, is I thought, well, I don't know what I'm doing, but if I don't do this, somebody else will, and maybe they won't have the credentials that I have. And so that was literally the thoughts that ran through my head, and that's what spurred me on to doing more media as I move forward. So to your point, I think that's exactly what this book did and does, is think about who's that dietitian who has this potential to build their skills and reach a broader audience, whether their expertise is clinical renal nutrition or diabetes or cancer or general nutrition or sports nutrition or whatever. How can we help them be more confident and build those skills in different platforms? And they might find something that they really love.
Oh, that is so true. And I try to impress. I was just last week at a meeting of educators, and a lot of the educators feel a lack of confidence in how to teach communication. And I say, you know what? we learn communication by doing communication. You became a better communicator as you did more and more media interviews. And
yes.
granted, you look back at your first ones and you kind of think, oh, I was a novice. Well, we all are novices.
Got to start somewhere.
You start somewhere. And so what this book hopefully will do is give people something to begin with and hopefully propel them to say yes to those experiences. And then as they do them, they will get better and better. You don't learn just by reading the book. You do better by implementing what it has you do. And so it really does cover soup to nuts, if I can use that old saying.
Mm-hmm.
So we start with the fundamentals in the first section. And then the second section is such an important section about how to be evidence-based. And the chapters that were included and the content that was included was based on my experiences with students, even at a top-tier university like Purdue, that struggled with knowing how to access the literature and how to interpret it and then how to translate it. And then chapters on things like ethics and not plagiarizing and all of that, that's all in that second section. Then the third section is all about developing messages. You helped with the first chapter in that section. And really knowing your audience. That's where we have that magic chapter 11 about needs assessments. We cover behavior change theories. It's a well-written chapter on that. I love the way they did that. About culture, about working with people of different ages. So it just covers such a gamut of really useful information. With that foundation of those first three chapters, then we really get into how to communicate. Whole big section on presentations, how to develop them, how to interact with your audience, how to do visual aids, openings and closings, presentation skills. Then there's a section on writing, food photography, food demos, videography, a variety of different forms of communicating. A whole section on media. You helped with 2 of those chapters, and that includes blogging and social media as well as more traditional media. And then we've got a section 7 is kind of a potpourri of things that aren't usually ever covered anywhere. It includes things like logistical planning of a communication event. It includes how to moderate a session. There's a whole chapter on how to do a Q&A.
Love it.
That is really a good chapter. It's so important, and people assume that you're going to just somehow flounder through it.
Yeah.
Some of these subjects are written about so little that it was hard to find background on them. And so we wrote a lot from experience, but there was some background, but not as much as would be nice. So now we'll become the source.
There you go.
There's a chapter on marketing, a chapter on evaluation, and then the final section has more advanced level skills like grant writing journal articles, writing books, business communication, that type of thing. So it covers so much. And it covers way more than one course at an undergraduate level would ever. Way more than my course did, even though mine was covered a lot.
You can't cover all of that in a course.
Well, and then the other thing that's cool is every section, so there's 8 of them, had a section opener that was really very much a personal story. Like, for example, for section 6, it was Liz Wise and her podcasting story. So that section opener gives a lot of good information about podcasting, but from a personal story standpoint, which is a very effective communication technique that readers today really look for. So that was kind of a fun thing to look for people to contribute to those section openers.
Absolutely. It's funny. I'm thinking as you're talking about the book, I say this when I do my presentations or workshops on whether it's being a better presenter or podcasting or live TV or videos or whatever. I say the techniques that I'm sharing with you, I have to follow myself. So we had to follow these with the book that we're talking about communications, and it gets to be a little bit interesting in the process.
In fact, that was something that I would tell the educators. And as I'm working right now on the ancillary materials, which are the materials that educators will get when they adopt the book for their course. And one of my messages to them is, okay, you may not feel very comfortable or confident teaching communication, but you're going to become a better communicator when you teach it.
Yes.
Learn along with your students and be honest with them maybe on the first day of class that you're growing as a communicator and you're looking forward to becoming better along with them.
Absolutely. And back to your point, and because I say this in my trainings as well, because it's true and I've lived it, you do learn by doing. I had the most amazing media trainings when I was a dairy council dietitian and a supermarket dietitian, but I learned more by actually doing. And I think dietitians by nature and being science-minded, we're waiting till we have everything that we need to know. And then then we're ready. And I think social media has been a good reminder to us that, really you cannot learn social media unless you jump in and do it. But that's the same with other types of communications. You have to practice, you have to prepare, and you have to just experience it. And every TV segment I do, every speaking engagement I have, every training and workshop that I conduct, I learn something new, and it makes the next one that much better. And so I really want our listeners to embrace that, because you do have to have those fundamentals in place. You have to be evidence-based. Being compelling, I think, takes time. And knowing your audience, it's easier in some settings than others. For example, if you're being asked to speak at a community or a health professional meeting or whatever, you can find out a lot about your audience by asking questions and preparing ahead of time. If you're doing a TV segment, well, you can find out, what that demographic is based on the type of show and what time of day it is. With my podcast, I've had to survey my listeners because I have a kind of avatar in mind of who I'm speaking to, but then I don't really know until I survey them. So it kind of depends on the platform, but you have to have those foundations in place, but then you have to do it in order to learn and build those skills.
That's so true.
So I wanted to ask you, what was the biggest challenge in working with this? And it might be something we've already touched on, but I'm curious what the biggest challenge was.
Biggest is a hard word to narrow it down. One challenge that taking on a project like this is simply the enormity of it. And way too many things, I think, in our lives, we never get it done because we just get buried in the process. And so just being determined to meet those deadlines, and sometimes they weren't met, but
we tried.
Keeping at it and getting it done and just persevering. That may just sound really general, but that's kind of the biggest challenge when you take on something this big is just, it's huge. I mean, 650 pages is a lot of writing, and it doesn't happen once. You write it and you rewrite it.
Oh, and we didn't just write words. I mean, we had to really condense it, and the revisions and the edits, and we were very thoughtful with making it concise and compelling.
Well, and looking up references, and there's just a lot of details, getting copyright approvals. It's just a big, big project. And that would have been the thing that would have had me say no to it, because it wasn't my first rodeo. I had written a textbook before. And in fact, in the past, I'd been the sole author. It's huge, even with all the editorial help you get. So to not give up, not to say, okay, I'm done with this, but to keep at it and I never really had that feeling because I was so committed to getting this out. It's such an important piece of work, and it will be so beneficial to so many people. I'm excited to see students begin to be equipped with this, for practitioners to have this on their shelves and hopefully get opened a lot, or on their computers if they simply buy the ebook. But it needed to be done. And so that kept me going.
I just spoke so much about how you have to learn by doing. But what this resource is going to do is make that process so much less painful and so much more efficient than just figuring out on your own what works and what doesn't work. So I really wanted to make that clear. It is just a long-awaited resource, and I feel that it's a must-have for every dietitian, every student, everybody in our profession.
I will say I'm really excited that the price point for this is really affordable. That was something that I stressed. I mean, how often do you buy a 650-page book for under $80? And that's what it'll cost to a member, and way less than most textbooks.
Yeah, textbooks are very expensive and so comprehensive. I mean, I know I keep saying that, but it's just mind-blowing how comprehensive it is.
Really, it is. It really is.
And it's not going to be outdated in even 5 years because, as we've discussed, those fundamentals are there, and the different platforms and vehicles might look a little different, or there might be new ones. But as I said, with my approach, you have this foundation of communication skills, and they can be transferred to all of these different platforms and new platforms, like you said, that we have yet to even imagine. This is something that I think is going to be on my shelf for a long time. Is there a digital version of this?
Yes, it'll be both an ebook or a print version. I don't know that you can almost make a textbook anymore that's not an e-version.
Yeah, awesome. Well, for anybody who's listening who's not a dietitian or a student in the field, do you have any advice for how they can seek and find nutrition-related information that they can trust?
Well, we do a chapter on this and talk about how to help consumers know what they can trust. And to a large extent, people are seeking information from the internet. And so we talk about how to know that a source is credible. And you can start with things like, does it end with .gov or .org? But .coms can also be very credible. But you want to look at who is it that's writing it and what are their credentials. And just because someone has some letters after their name doesn't mean they're an expert in what they're writing about or talking about. And so look for that. Not that that's always easy to determine, but at least check that out. For one thing, the site should give you that information. You should be able to figure out who the source is. And if you can't, then you might want to question it. And then really look at what is their motive. Are they trying to sell something? What kinds of evidence do they present to support their case? Is there research? Or do they just kind of talk in grandiose ways or just use anecdotal evidence? So there's several different pieces of criteria that you can use, but certainly going to sites like nutrition.gov or eatright.org can be good starting places for finding good, solid nutrition information.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, Barb, as dietitians, we are uniquely positioned to help people digest, if you will, nutrition information and make their own well-informed food decisions. But we've really needed a little guidance on this journey. And I really feel like this book is that long-awaited resource to help dietitians create and deliver compelling, science-based messages that engage and empower audiences. So I just want to thank you so much for leading this charge, and for me to be part of this exciting journey has just been really amazing. So thank you so much.
You are so welcome, and it has been such a pleasure to get to know people like you who I knew of, but I didn't know well, and others who can have a voice in helping not only the consumers that we reach ultimately, but all of the future and current registered dietitian nutritionists to be able to have that voice. And so it was just such a privilege to say yes to the Academy and to take on this effort, because I feel like as I wind down my career, this is an opportunity to leave a lasting legacy of how we can all be effective and confident communicators that really make a difference with all the audiences that we serve. So thank you for having me on your show and just all the work that you do.
Well, thank you, Barb. And like I said, I didn't know you before, but I was like, how do I not know this person? We're like soul sisters. Like we just feel the same, a passion about communications. And I will have all the links to the book and information in my show notes at soundbitesrd.com. But I do want people to know that your website is nutritioncommunicator.com. You're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. You might be Barbara Mayfield or Nutrition Communicator, but I'll have all those links in my show notes. And I really encourage people to follow you and stay tuned for the release of the book. And like I said, I feel like it's a must-have for every single dietitian and student. So thank you again, Barb. And for everybody listening, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind. Till next time.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. Music by Dave Burke, produced by Jag in Detroit Podcasts.